contagious and had shaken hands with a number of people, um, you know, just by doing that, many of you would have come down with polio. And when you went home, you would have passed it on to your friends and family. That's how contagious polio is. However, polio is not just a modern day disease. Hieroglyphics found in Egypt in around 1500 BC, more than 3,500 years ago, shows a polio victim on crutches with one leg smaller than the other. So we fast forward to the summer of 1953, where hospital polio wards with dreaded iron lungs like the picture on the left help polio victims breathe. And what's ironic is that yesterday's iron lungs are today's ventilators. Here we have a bank of iron lungs, polio victims stacked on top of each other. Here's a baby only a few months old in an iron lung. If one member of the family came down with polio, many times the whole family was quarantined. So the iron lung is not the only thing that the 50s have in common with today's shelter-in-place orders, in effect because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And actually, scientists knew less about polio back in the 50s than today's scientists know about the coronavirus. Like COVID-19, they did not know why some that caught polio had mild symptoms and others so severe that they died or had extreme outcomes. In the case of polio, paralyzed limbs and breathing issues. Like COVID-19, people were contagious before they had symptoms, thus unknowingly infecting others. In fact, they now know that for every diagnosed case of polio, there were as many as 200 people with polio walking around with little or no symptoms at all. Another similarity between COVID and polio is that both targeted specific but different age groups. COVID-19 is especially lethal for elderly who have existing health issues. Today, I got a notification from my former club that one of the members passed away with COVID today. You know, for polio, it was the young. To this day, they really don't know why the young. I suspect because the younger child, the more they put anything in their mouths. Like today's pandemic in the 1950s, before the Salk vaccine, people were frightened. It was a scary time because catching polio was as easy as catching a cold. And a strange thing was happening, or should I say not happening. Summer rituals. Public swimming pools were closed, little league fields in many towns were empty. And just like today, mothers didn't have their kids with them while grocery shopping. I often hear from polio survivors stories on how they felt abandoned when they were in hospital polio wards because, like today's coronavirus patients, they weren't allowed to have visitors. They would go weeks without seeing their parents, and when they did, it was from a far distance, usually behind glass windows. This is where, in meetings that I'm together with the people, everyone says, "Aw." This is me just before I started to walk. What's interesting in this photo is what's missing. My mom refused to have my leg braces photographed. I suspect for fear that people would ostracize me and or my family because I had polio. I was paralyzed from my neck down at age 10 months old for 6 months. Just actually for 6 months before the Salk vaccine was widely distributed. Because my mom did Sister Kinney's physical therapy on me, Sister Kinney was a nurse from Australia that developed a physical therapy program so that the polio victim who was paralyzed, their muscles didn't atrophy. My mom did that physical therapy on me every waking hour, every day for 6 months while she was carrying my younger brother. Because of that, I walked a year later. In fact, my brother takes credit for teaching me how to walk. He would lean me up against the refrigerator and encourage me, like my parents would encourage me to walk. Okay. Unlike my parents, when I started to fall, he didn't catch me. So eventually, out of self-defense, I put my foot out to stop myself from falling, thus my first steps. And to this day, my brother takes credit for teaching me how to walk. As years went by, I got to the point where most people never would have guessed I had had polio. I had a fairly normal childhood, and I actually played baseball, basketball, and football in high school. However, my coaches didn't know I had had polio. They didn't know that polio would have caused a problem in me being able to compete. Okay, so they often yelled at me and often called me lazy. It was a very frustrating time in my life. That was polio for a lot of people. I was one of the lucky ones because many young adults or children grew up, died or grew up paralyzed or had an arm and a leg that was significantly smaller because their muscles did atrophy. I have many friends that got polio when they were older. I was blessed because I don't remember having polio. My mom would tell me how I would scream in pain when she stretched my muscles while I was paralyzed. For those who were older when they got polio, they remember all too well the pain and how they suffered from multiple painful corrective surgeries. One friend of mine even had one of their good legs shortened 5 inches to match their polio leg so they could walk without a significant limp. When I turned 40, I started to have renewed muscle weakness, joint pain, and extreme fatigue. Eventually, after seeing 10 different doctors in 2 years, I was finally diagnosed with post-polio syndrome. Many never get a diagnosis of post-polio syndrome and suffer without knowing why. 15 years later, I'm confined to a wheelchair for most of my mobility. For every child we save from polio, if they survive the initial polio virus attack, we truly are saving them from a life of pain and suffering. So with post-polio syndrome, the more a polio survivor overuses their muscles, the faster their muscles die off from overuse. For somebody like me who had almost every muscle from my neck down affected by polio, just the hard work of trying to get to normal over the years took a negative toll on my life, on my muscles. The neurologist said if I didn't want to lose the total use of my legs again, I had to make dramatic changes in my life. The old adage of use it or lose it had to be replaced by conserve to preserve. But like most polio survivors, being an A-type personality, it was very hard for me to slow down. On the screen is some of the symptoms that those of us with post-polio syndrome often encounter. These symptoms occur about 30 to 40 years after the original polio virus attack, in as many as 70% of those paralyzed by polio. To avoid overuse, I restrict my steps to a couple hundred steps a day. Many days, each step is very painful. However, I've learned that there's very little I can't do. I just have to find a different way of doing it. And I'm lucky that I live in a world where there are organizations like Rotary International and with Rotarians like yourself who care about the welfare of others and who put service above self. This past April 12th was the 65th anniversary of Jonas Salk announcing to the world the success of the initial human test to a national audience, opening the way to a mass distribution of the Salk vaccine. President Eisenhower declared Salk and his team of scientists national heroes, and there were great celebrations worldwide. Then Salk refused to patent the vaccine. It's estimated that he turned down the opportunity to personally earn billions of dollars, literally by giving away the vaccine to the world. And Salk often said, our greatest responsibility is to be good ancestors. I submit to you that Jonas Salk will go down in history as a great ancestor. So count your blessings, because I assume that a large number of you had received vaccinations when you were younger, protecting you from childhood diseases. There are some people who cannot be vaccinated due to medical reasons or compromised immune systems. That's why it's important to have the majority of people around that person be vaccinated, thus creating what's on the screen is called the herd immunity. This past year, because we here in the United States have lower vaccination rates in many areas throughout the country, have lower vaccination rates than India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. There were over 1,300 cases of measles in the United States from one case that came from outside of the United States. And to control measles, 93% of the population needs to be vaccinated to create this herd immunity. One lady, due to her cancer treatments causing a compromised immune system, she was ill. She went to the doctors, logically, Unfortunately, she sat next to somebody who was contagious with measles in the doctor's office, and that lady died. If it was a newborn who was too young to get the vaccination sitting next to that contagious person, the newborn baby could have easily died. Thousands died in Europe and Asia last year from measles. For polio, you need at least 85% of the population vaccinated to create this needed herd immunity. Unfortunately, every 60 seconds, a child dies from preventable diseases. 1,500 kids die every day from vaccine preventable diseases. And according to Bill Gates, for every dollar spent on childhood immunizations, you get $44 in economic benefits. The reduction of cost of treating a person who's ill, either at the time that they're ill or throughout their whole life, and also the increased productivity that that person has because they're not ill, comes out to $44 for every dollar that we spend on childhood immunizations. That's a pretty good investment. As you know, from 125 endemic countries in 1985, with 350,000 cases of polio a year, that's almost 1,000 cases a day when we first started Rotary's PolioPlus, down to 46 cases so far this year, 5 cases in Afghanistan, 41 in Pakistan. Nigeria has been polio-free for almost 4 years. With the help of Rotary and its world partners, we have vaccinated more than 4 billion children, many by dedicated Rotarians during National Immunization Days. Rotary has helped prevent more than 19 million cases of polio and avoiding more than 2 million deaths while raising more than $3 billion. We vaccinate more than 450 million children a year in developing countries. But until polio is eradicated, it is a world threat. And because there's no cure for polio, vaccination is the only protection. Here's a global aviation pattern of the world in a 24-hour period. Each line is a airplane flight. Most of North America and Europe cannot be seen on this map. We truly are a plane ride away from polio returning to the United States if polio is not eradicated, especially if we don't keep up vaccination rates. I pray that the eradication of polio happens soon so that all kids around the world will avoid what happened to many like myself when a vaccine was not available. So we come to the question, what is the plus in PolioPlus? Over the next several months, the PolioPlus infrastructure, which has basically stopped doing any organized vaccination campaigns because of COVID, the PolioPlus infrastructure Rotary helped build, including its tools, workforce, and extensive surveillance networks, will be used to help prevent the spread of COVID-19 by supporting preparedness and response activities in many countries, including Nigeria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. This truly represents the plus in PolioPlus, just as it did in the past to respond to outbreaks of Ebola, yellow fever, and avian flu. And like I said, with Ebola, there are outbreaks twice in the past 4 years in Africa, especially in Nigeria, where the PolioPlus infrastructure and the people involved in the PolioPlus literally stopped the Ebola outbreak from becoming a pandemic. Recently, a letter from PolioPlus International Chair Michael McGovern and past Rotary International President John Germ outlined the role that PolioPlus is currently playing worldwide in the coronavirus pandemic. Here we have a polio survivor in Nigeria who used to have to travel miles to get water for his herd. PolioPlus drilled boreholes in his village, and now he gets clean water for his herd and family without traveling miles, thus becoming more productive. A few months ago in India, NID workers and volunteers vaccinated more than 32 million children in one weekend. These immense NID, National Immunization Day vaccine campaigns are also changing societies in Muslim countries by employing women to go house to house vaccinating children. In the Muslim religion, a man cannot enter a home if the man of the house is not there. A woman can. Therefore, by employing women to do the vaccinations, less children are skipped, and the number of women in the workforce are increasing and changing societal views on women working. During NIDs in areas that have malaria, PolioPlus workers distribute mosquito nets along with the vaccine. This polio survivor had no way of financially supporting himself until PolioPlus taught him how to make hand-driven bikes that allow polio survivors to get around without dragging themselves on the ground. He started a business making these tricycles. Here's one of his employees that now has a job and is a productive member of society, mostly because of Rotary's PolioPlus. While confronting the new challenges of today, it is important that Rotary members continue the fight to end polio, to sustain our commitment to the children of the world that we made in 1985, that we will eradicate polio, and to reach our fundraising goal of $50 million this year, which with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation matching monies becomes $150 million. Continued contributions to PolioPlus will ensure that polio eradication activities that are ongoing, such as surveillance and vaccine supply, continue, and that we come out of this crisis strong and tackle the remaining barriers to a polio-free world. As I said before, I am one of the lucky ones. If I was born in a developing country back in the 1950s, I wouldn't be here today. I've shared my personal story with you, certainly not for your sympathy for my personal situation. Through the love of my family and friends and being fortunate to find knowledgeable doctors, I've been able to be a father, husband, son, friend, and now a proud Rotarian. So please remember that individual efforts and ideas started organizations like Rotary, Shelter Box, Rise Against Hunger, Easter Seals, and so many more great humanitarian efforts. So never underestimate your individual efforts or ideas. As Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. For inviting me to talk to you about polio and PolioPlus, mahalo. And if anyone, if we have the time, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, John. We do have time for questions, so if you do have a question, just unmute yourself and shoot it John's way.
Any questions?
I see Craig unmuted.
Question. So is polio mainly waterborne in most countries? So is water quality a big deal in prevention?
Well, yes, water is a big issue, but polio lives in fecal matter outside of the body. So, and that's why children, come down with it, because you can't stop a kid from putting their hands in their mouth. And, that's a few people shaking their head. So in poor sanitation areas and where there's poor water quality, yeah, it is a major problem, and one of the reasons why polio is so hard to eradicate, because the polio lives in fecal matter. The polio is what's called an enterovirus, where it enters the body through the mouth, goes into the digestive system. Now, the vaccine doesn't kill the polio virus. The vaccine stops the virus from going from the intestines and passing into the nervous system, through the blood system. So that's what the vaccine stops. So if somebody has polio in their digestive system, many times they'll pass it through their excretions and through fecal matter and in poor sanitation areas where kids are playing and things like that. That's how polio. And one of the most expensive things in eradicating polio is actually the environmental sampling to make sure that polio isn't in the system. When they find in a, say in a different village in a particular section, they'll find the polio virus in poor sanitation areas, they'll then do mass vaccinations in that area. About, I think it was like 8 years ago, World Cup was in Brazil. Brazil's a country that hadn't had polio in decades. In the sewage system, they found polio, and which means that somebody coming to visit and watch the games or participate in the World Cup actually was contagious. So yeah, water. Actually, I find connections of all 6 areas of focus with Rotary has connections with PolioPlus. Good question. Anybody else?
I have a statement, and my cousin, when she turned 70, died of the polio that she had as a child. I had no idea of what you're talking about at that time, because I was shocked that it came back and she passed away from it.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the virus itself doesn't come back, but there are so many different complications that polio survivors have. For instance, with me, I had an undiagnosed sleep apnea, which more than 40% of polio survivors have some kind of sleep disorder.
Wow.
And because of that undiagnosed sleep apnea, I needed a triple coronary artery bypass. And I was very lucky that they caught it, and because I don't have any heart history in my family, and no triglyceride or cholesterol problems, they said it's because of the undiagnosed sleep apnea, which basically does the same thing to your arteries as smoking does.
Oh, okay.
And there are a lot of parallels to what's going on right now with COVID-19, because one of the things that I know they've been talking about are the possibility of some longer term issues. Mm-hmm. So even the people that are out there that are saying, open it up, if I get the virus, I'll fight it off, and I'll be fine. They don't know what's going to happen to them 20, 40 years from now. So that's another very strong argument, actually, that I think could be made against.
Absolutely. You don't know what kind of respiratory issues and things like that occur. Right. One of the things I'd like to not leave on, but make sure that I pass on is, one of my wishes is that a silver lining coming out of this pandemic hopefully will be a substantial change throughout the world in the attitude towards vaccinations. What's incredible is there's very little noise or chatter from anti-vaxxer groups. They've been awful quiet, and I really think that down the road you'll have a major change in the attitude of vaccines and childhood immunizations and things like that. I certainly pray. I just have in our paper today, there's an article on a study of 138 different scientific surveys and studies that included 23 million people that vaccines have no negative effects, especially with autism. There's no correlation, and it's really an incredible study, and hopefully we can get that information out real fast.
Yeah, that'd be great. So a trivia question for the club. Who here has played a board game that was developed to be played by polio patients while they were in iron lungs? I know I have.
Wow.
Who's played Chutes and Ladders? That was developed because...
No, that's not the game, Rick.
Oh, is it Candyland?
Yes.
Candyland, yes.
Candyland. Sorry, I played that too. Sorry. But yeah, Candyland was developed because it could be played while kids were in iron lungs. And that was how that game came to be. And then the other one Do you all know the song that has to do with the polio vaccine?
What song?
It's from Mary Poppins.
Spoonful of Sugar?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. Because that's how they used to give the vaccine. It was on the sugar cube.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, Dottie.
Buddy.
I'd like to share you with my club in Illinois. How do we contact you?
Facebook, you can.
That works. I also have John's email address and I have Dottie's email address, so I can connect you too.
Oh, that'd
Awesome.
be great.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
yeah. I've given 6 talks this past week, so it's been fun
Wow.
connecting North Carolina, Australia. It's really been a lot of fun.
Right.
Be happy to give a talk to your club.
Okay, that'd be great. It's the Jack Blaine Club.
Okay,
Jack Blaine is big in PolioPlus.
I've heard his name. I've not met him.
Yeah, well, he was a member of our club for 50 years.
Wow.
That'll be great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I will connect you two up after this meeting. This, John's presentation was recorded, so this will be going on to our YouTube channel sometime later this week. Did I mention I've been up since 1 o'clock? So it'll happen later this week. But thank you, John. I think this is a wonderful presentation and unfortunately became a little more timely as well.
Yeah.
And thank you. And
John.
I've really enjoyed my friendship with Ron. And actually, I think we met in North Carolina at a Zone Institute meeting.
Yes, it was Zone Institute. You were given a talk there.
In fact, I think that was the first time I ever gave a talk with using a PowerPoint. And I had the unfortunate, I had the issue with, not issue, but I had to follow Tiffany Irvin, who was a former beauty queen. So that was a hard act to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I don't know, we also have a Rotary polio survivor here on our island. I don't know if everybody's aware of that, but the president of the Hanalei Bay Club, Monica Ozust, also had polio as a young child.
Wow.
Huh.
It was a recent television show on American Experience that talked about the polio epidemic and sort of the controversy between Salk and Sabin in terms of developing their individual immunizations for that. It was very interesting.
Yeah. I've become friends with Dr. Peter Salk, Jonas Salk's eldest son, actually one of the first children ever to get the vaccine.
Wow.
And he's come to, when I was in New Jersey, to a polio support group convention. And he talked about that, it was more than a friendly competition between Albert Sabin and Jonas Salk. And I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, Dr. Peter Salk and Albert Sabin's daughter actually shared the float at the Rose Bowl parade.
Huh.
And they sort of patched up family issues.
Wow.
And it was good to see them together.
Wonderful.
It was a big competition back then. It
Yeah.
was, March of Dimes had many, well, it's like right now, there's many different scientists trying to find a vaccine for COVID. Another correlation between polio and COVID is a big competition to get that first vaccine out there.
Hmm.
Hopefully it comes soon.
I just have to say that 1955, my wife Janice was working at WWJ Detroit, which is a television station. And when somebody ran down the hall yelling that they'd invented the polio vaccine, she said that everybody cried because it was so meaningful. I mean, we all as children had to make compromises about what we did when, because of polio.
Yep.
So it was a huge thing.
Eisenhower had Salk to the White House. There were parades. I mean, it was like World War II ended, the celebrations.
Yeah. Meaningful.
I can remember as I was growing up, my father was in the Air Force, so we traveled quite frequently. And through the course of my life, I think I had 15 different polio vaccinations or oral vaccines. So I probably am one of the most protected people in the world.
And if you were going to travel to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, or some of other countries, you'd have to get a booster for polio.
Yeah, probably.
Wow.
Definitely.
Well, again, John, thank you so much.
Oh, it was
Thank
my
you.
honor, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, John.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks,
John.
Thanks, Ron, for setting this up. Again, let's give John a hand.
Yay.
But if any of you all know of a great speaker like John, feel free to set that up, because we have openings coming up. When polio is eradicated, it will be the second disease that has been eradicated from the world, the first being smallpox. I know I mentioned this to Jonathan. I showed him my vaccination mark at one point. He was like, "What the heck is that?" And I said, "That's from my smallpox vaccine." And he doesn't need to get one of those. And he will never need to get one of those. And that's fantastic. And we want the same thing to do with polio. So thank you all. I will not do the ringing of the bell, so we'll just go gong and call it a day.
Yay.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Thanks, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha.